Great. So welcome to today's webinar, everyone. My name is Sofia Svanbeck, and I'm going to be the host today. And together with me, I have my colleague Lasse Ziegler, who is going to be presenting on focus on value creation today. This is now the seventh part of the Organic Agility webinars that we have been keeping so far. And right now, it would be really nice if you can just chat in the chat with us and let me know if you have been already in the previous webinars as well, or if this is the first webinar that you are attending, just to get a little bit of a touch who is listening to us today. So please do that. This is also principle number 3 being presented from Organic Agility. And then in February, there's going to be the next webinar. So we're going to keep you posted when that's happening. Before I'm going to let Lasse talk, I just want to go through some practicalities regarding using Zoom. So first of all, chat with us as much as you like during the webinar. Please make sure in the chat that you chat with panelists and attendees so that the discussion is transparent to everyone in the room. Makes it a lot more fun. There's also a Q&A session that can be found beside the chat. So in the end of this presentation, we're going to take all the questions from the audience. So while Lasse is presenting, if you have a question, just feel free to pop it in the Q&A, and we'll have a look at that later on. As usual, also this webinar will be recorded and it's going to be shared on YouTube later, and then also in the follow-up email that you guys are getting that are attending live today. We're also putting the recording on a blog post, which will be posted on our social media and so on later. So stay tuned also if you want to share around with colleagues and friends who missed the live setting. In the email, we're also going to put links to the slides. So you don't need to take any notes if you don't want to, but of course you can also do that. I'm going to jump out now and I will be back for the Q&As, and I'm giving now over to Lasse, and I hope that you guys chat with me during the presentation and enjoy what Lasse is going to tell you. See you later.
Thanks, Fia. Well, she's still going to be hanging around in the chat and so on. And just as a reminder, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A because both of us probably will miss the questions in the chat, and scrolling up and down in the chat trying to find questions is hard. So if you have a question, put it in the Q&A section of Zoom itself. Just wanted to go back one slide because Fia mentioned that we are now in part 7. Since all the principles that we're talking about kind of depend a bit on each other, and there's kind of like a sequence to them. If you haven't seen the previous webinars, it's okay, I will recap the main point of it, but it might be an interesting idea for you to go later after this webinar and have a look at the other ones, because that goes more in depth in the foundations on which we are building kind of each of these principles. And I'll be referring back to some of these previous webinars also in this one. Anyway, so yeah, so just a few words about myself. So my name is Lasse Ziegler. I'm based in Espoo, Finland, or part of our Finland office. I've been with Agile 42 since 2011, so actually for me now it's like a 10-year being part of the Agile 42 family. What do I do? Mostly I help clients, organizations improve how they operate, how they work, change their organization culture, and help them gain more agility in their organization. If you want to know more about myself, there's my email address and LinkedIn and so on. You can connect with me, contact me, and so on. Feel free to do that. I don't want to talk too much about myself. As I said, I wanted to recap a couple of things from the previous webinars, and I've also put here the link to a webpage where you can find all previous webinars with their videos and so on. So if you want to go more in depth, you can do that. But these next couple of slides that I've put up here are the ones that kind of need to keep in mind when we're talking about value and why value is important and how we would achieve value. The first thing that I wanted to bring up is when we are talking about organic agility, we're talking about shifting an organizational metaphor. So what we want to go is from a very mechanical organization that focuses on its processes and structures and operates almost like a machine. What we are after here with organic agility is to shift to a more organic metaphor in our organization. We see the organization more as a growing entity that is constantly changing and constantly adapting to its surrounding circumstances. So, like imagine a tree, and if you cut off a branch from a tree, it will continue to grow, or um, it's kind of like constantly adapting to its environment, and that's what we want to have more in organization. Um, Reason for that is that if you have a lot of interruptions, a lot of unforeseen situations. Think back of 2020, like there were some unforeseen situations that many of us didn't plan for. An organic organization that is constantly adapting is more likely to be able to adapt to that situation and cope with those unforeseen circumstances. While a very mechanical has a hard time of changing how they operate and how they function when these kind of things do happen. Now, organic agility itself consists of a different couple of pieces that are important to remember here. We have a leadership framework that was covered in previous webinars. We have the 5 organic principles, and today we're talking about the third principle. There are practices that you have in your organization when you are applying organic agility. Those practices you kind of like emerge yourself applying those principles. So there's no fixed set of these are the practices that an organization should follow. You need to find what are the right practices for your organization. But the principles are kind of like more of a common thing. Those principles function as kind of like a scaffolding or like a set of guiding principles under which we can kind of organize and improve our organization in organic agility. And at the bottom, as the base, we do have some tools and models. And when we talk about the principles, so I'm going to go through the principle 3, focus on the value. And I will also pull out a couple of tools that can help with focusing value, how to discover the value and so on. That's kind of like what we want to cover here today. Just as a short recap, what those 5 principles are. So the first principle is about increasing culture awareness and coherence. So that's on focusing what is your organization culture and that we have a coherent culture. Second principle is about situational decision making. So depending on what kind of situation you have, the way you make decisions might have to change. If you have a certain kind of problem, for example, you have a very complex issue that you need to resolve, and then doing a clear here, do this and do that, and then do that kind of approach might not lead to the best result. What you instead want to maybe do is start to experiment and find what is the right solution to that complex problem, just as an example in there. Focusing on value creation, we'll cover that a little bit later. And then in future webinars, we will go into validating changes in small increments and optimizing the value flow. Principle 4 webinar, the date is somewhere in February. I don't remember exactly where it was, but Fia can put it on the chat if we already have a set date and time for that. Not, we will announce it later, probably in the email to all the participants. Another thing that I wanted to pick up from previous ones is the market curve. So every product is kind of like somewhere along on that market curve. You might be an early majority product, or you might be a late majority product, or even an innovator product at this particular case. And depending on where you are on that market curve, your customers tend to behave very differently, and that's something that is probably going to be quite important when we talk about customer value, for example. So keep that in mind, that we have that market curve, and that is very relevant for things that we talk about here today. Yeah. Last thing I wanted to bring up from previous webinars is Kinefin. So we have the kind of like domains or areas of something being clear, and this is related to the second principle, the context of the decision making. So you can have a clear problem, a decision that is kind of like a clear area. You can have something that is what we would call a complicated, complex, or chaotic domain. Now, just to give some examples of what the differences are, in a clear one, you have clearly a best practice. You know exactly how to do it. You've done this before. There are clear instructions. It's just like, okay, this is this situation. What's the kind of like way to approach this? Okay, and then you just go off and respond and do the things like you have done before in that. That's clear environment domain. When we talk about complicated, you need to usually analyze that situation to kind of see, get some data, analyze, see where we are. And then based on that analysis, you respond in the appropriate way. And there might be different good practices to choose from. You could do it like this or like that, and different ways on how to respond on that. But then when we come to a complex environment, there is not really it's clearly not a best practice. There might not even be any good practices. So it's more like of running an experiment and saying like what could we possibly do here? Okay, let's try out this thing and see what happens. That actually helps forward, cool. Then we can use that and continue in that direction. But it might also be that approach, that way to solve that particular problem is the wrong one. And then when you're in chaotic, well, that's a bit of a more challenging thing. There's just act on it, see what happens out of that, and then based on what you sense out of that action that you did, you can respond. I'll get back to this because value is also related to this one. Now, when we talk about value, there is an assumption that I'm making here for the organizations that we're talking about. And that is that a successful organization must be good at delivering value to its customers. That's an assumption for me here. I'm kind of assuming that we're talking about for-profit organizations and not non-profits. A lot of the things I'm talking about are similar for non-profits, but there are some differences if you're not about making money, instead doing something else. Also, another case that I'm kind of excluding here a little bit is if you happen to be a governmental monopoly, a lot of these things that we talk about might also change. I personally don't have experience on governmental monopolies, so to talk about that. I've been working mostly with for-profit companies, so that's what we are focusing on. But yeah, to be successful, we need to be good at delivering values to our customers. And there are two parts to that statement in there, or two things that we need to consider and that are important for us. The first one is we need to really understand as an organization what is value. What does that actually mean for us? Because, I mean, if you don't know what value is in the first place, then how can you deliver it? So you need to identify that and be clear on what we mean with the word value. And I'll get into those two things next, so get to that. The second part of that is to understand how we create value. So how do we, now that we know what value actually is, so how do we get to that? And we need to be good at delivering that value. We need to figure that out as well. And those are kind of the two topics that I want to touch on here today, this webinar. So let's go to the first one. So understanding what value is. So I've put up a couple of questions here. So first, what is value? What does the market we are targeting recognize as value? Something we should be thinking about. And what do our customers describe as valuable? So there's kind of like a bit of different approaches or different perspectives we can take on what value is. And the first perspective I wanted to look at is, let's just look at what a dictionary would define to be value. So I dug up a dictionary, and this is what the dictionary says. Definition of value, the monetary worth of something, a fair return or equivalent in goods, services, or money for something exchange. Relative worth, utility, or importance, something such as a principle or quality intrinsically valuable or desirable. Dictionary definition in there. For organizations, I would say probably the first one and second one were be the kind of like most, at least that sound be the most kind of like reasonable definitions here. Usually value is something monetary worth of something in there. But there are also other things. Now, the other perspective that I want to go into and have a bit more look at is actually that you can look at value from two different directions. So on the one side, you can look at value from the organization side and the customer side. And those two are not the same thing. So when we talk about organization value, they might value different things than the customers. And assuming that these two are equal could be a big mistake to do in there. So, so when we talk about customer value, it's important to really understand what does the customer value, and not what do we think the customer would value. Those are also two different things. I've been in a lot of companies where the product management or people make these kind of statements. This is what our customers want. But how do you actually know that that is what your customer wants? Have you somehow validated that? Or are you just making an assumption that, oh, we think this is what our customers value and what our customers think is important? And finding that out, what a customer truly values, is not an easy question. It's not an easy thing to solve. I mean, you can't often go and ask the customer because he himself might also not know what is important right now. It can also be that you're asking the wrong customer. I mean, how do you even know what is the right customer to ask? If you go to a random person on the street and ask them, you get one answer, and you go to a different random person on the street, you get a different answer. So which of those two answers is the better one? And depending on what street you're on, you get completely different answers. So which street should you go on, and so on. So that kind of makes this problem really difficult to really understand what is that the customer values in there. The other thing is also there's a time perspective to this. So if you ask today what your customer is valuing, or find out today what your customer is valuing, that is not necessarily going to be the same tomorrow. Because what the customer finds important, or the customers find important, can change over time. There's no guarantee that it will stay the same. That's also something to consider when you have historical data. So if you mine existing data that you have and look like, okay, customer yesterday valued this, there's no guarantee that that is going to be the same tomorrow. So be careful of those kind of things. And those go into this challenging problem in there. And with this, I wanted to connect this a little bit to what we mentioned earlier, and that is the Kinefin in there. So if I ask you, so what is customer value? And you think about the different domains and areas when we talk about Kinefin, is this a question that is kind of like has a very clear answer? Is it a question that has a very complicated answer? Is this a question that has a very complex answer, or perhaps a chaotic one? I'd like to do a quick poll on this one. I'll launch it over here. And think about your own products that you have in your company that you're working on. Customer value. What is customer value? Is that something that is easy to answer, difficult to answer, chaotic? Let's see. Do a short poll. 30 seconds. Yeah. Almost everyone has voted. We are 28 out of 33 participants. 84%. Statistically, that's already quite good. So let's end the poll. So we got the majority said that it's going to be a complex. So 16 out of you, 57% of you says that it is going to be a very complex question. And that makes it challenging. Second largest was complicated with 29%. One of you said it's a clear question. That's interesting. Be interesting to dig deeper into that. And 3 of you, 11%, say it's actually chaotic. That makes it really challenging because that's almost inherently completely unknowable. But yeah, majority being complex, that means that there is no easy way of finding it out. You can't just go and study your customers and go like, okay, now we've done enough analysis and we found out this is what they value. You usually discover it, or it emerges through experimentation, trial and error, inspect and adapt. And you need to kind of learn over time what is it that our customers are actually valuing in there. And that makes it a difficult challenge in there. And as I said, I'll go into the tooling side, which is a bit on the solution of things later on, once we covered kind of like the problem first. Results. Anyway. So the other thing that I wanted to show out is I mentioned earlier the market curve. So what customer value is also will depend on where you are on that market curve. So if you imagine you are a startup, you're doing a completely new product. Your customers who are the innovators, the first early adopters, innovators that you're buying your product, they might value completely different things than, let's say, the late majority. They are inherently also from their behavior very different. For example, an early adopter, innovator wants new, innovative, cutting-edge features. They're willing to try out new things. They're willing to take risks in there. But then when you go to the late majority, they just want an off-the-shelf, has everything in it, ready-made package solution that just works. Everyone else is already using it, so there's no risk in me buying it. And it just has all the bells and whistles you could possibly imagine, and that's it. So there's a big difference between those two things. So depending on where you are, that will also change. So also during the life cycle of your market and your product, the customer value also will change. So it's not a thing that is completely set in stone that, okay, when we started our product, we discovered this is what our customer value, and then we stick with that for the next 10 years, because it's going to be different by the time we get to the next stage, and so on. So it keeps changing from time to time. A good example that I've seen, for example, is cloud services and big companies. I mean, when the first time cloud services came out, all the big companies all were like completely, we don't want to touch them at all, because, I mean, putting data into the cloud, isn't that a huge risk? That's very dangerous, and like, we don't want to do that. Nowadays, more and more of the big companies are adapting and using actually cloud services. So we shifted from an innovator early adopter market to a more of a early majority, perhaps late majority market, and we're somewhere in there where the behavior of the customers has quite changed, and what they value has also changed in there. Now it's much more important that you have with your cloud service all the possible integrations you could imagine, instead of just trying out something completely new, innovative, and so on. So let's kind of like on the value side. So we kind of need to think about okay, value is important for us, and what is the customer value? And like to really like focus on that, what the customer value is. So let's go to the other side of the equation a bit and talk about how can we create value. For that, I've pulled out two different tools as some examples of how you could create value in an organization, or to understand how to create that value in there. The first tool that I want to shortly cover is what we call a value stream discovery. And the second tool that I want to shortly cover is what competency mapping. These are just two example tools. There are others as well, but these are what we often use to kind of address these issues and problems that we talked about before. Now, when we talk about value stream discovery, that's the technique for identifying what are possible value streams, what are those target groups, or target users, target personas that that we kind of want to address and for which we are building our product and services. And here's important: this sounds almost like value stream mapping in a sense. Sounds very similar. Value stream discovery, value stream mapping. Are those the same thing? Are they different things? So they're not the same thing. So what we mean with value stream discovery is we start with the customer and not with a process. So normally when you talk about value stream mapping, you're mapping an existing value stream out, which means you have some sort of process that you're mapping out, visualizing it, and then creating a future process and changing it and so on. That's not what we're doing here. What we're doing is we start with a customer to identify who is the target group, the target of a value stream. Because your customer's need, your customer's problem is what we're trying to address with that value stream. And we start from that, and then we go backwards from that customer to create the value stream to deliver on that customer's, the target group's needs and problems. That's what we want to do here. So that's kind of like a big difference between value stream mapping and discovery in there. I'm not going to go into super details on how to create this. There's separate trainings that we do on this and so on. And yeah, I see Sophia also put a short description on it from our website. So Basically, what we typically tend to do there is 5 different steps. The first one is we need to find out what are the different scenarios that exist in this target space, in that problem space that we are in. So what are the kind of like interactions with that our customers have with our product or service, or potential interactions they could have with our product or service. And from that, we create a set of different scenarios that we then need to validate. If you've read, for example, Eric Ries's book on Lean Startup, then very similar ideas as in there. You need to constantly validate your assumptions in there. So when you come up, okay, this is a possible scenario, how do we know and how do we prove that this scenario is actually something that is real and not something that we just have thought up? Of course, if you have an existing product, then you can mine that data and use that. Start from scratch with a new company, new product, new market. There's a lot more validation there. But that's the first thing, is figuring out those different scenarios that describe those interactions that your customers could have with that product or service that you have. Out of that, we then want to extract or emerge personas and the needs and reasons of dissatisfactions of those personas. So what is the problem that that customer is having? How is he struggling to solve that problem right now? To really understand that customer as good as we can. And this is pretty normal, traditional ways, techniques, and so on to create those personas that go into this kind of subpart in there. And out of that, we create a whole set of different personas that then again, of course, need to be validated because we also need to check that our personas that we created actually represent real customers and real potential people that are involved or interacting with our product or services. Now, then comes the next step, which is taking all those different personas and figuring out what are our target groups. That's about clustering. So we have a lot of different personas, and a lot of these different personas kind of all are related to the same thing. They might have slightly different needs and dissatisfactions. They all kind of like belong together. They're kind of all a little bit the same. So out of those, we create one target group. So a target group is a set of different personas that have related needs or problems that we're trying to address with our product. That's where we get to the target groups. Now, when we have that target group, this is for us kind of like the endpoint of a value stream. You have a target group that has a problem and need represented by multiple personas, and we have a value stream that delivers that value to that different target group, that particular target group. So out of that, then we need to go backwards and start to figuring out how do we actually deliver value for that particular target group. Well, for that we use what we call activity mapping, which is then mapping out, hopefully using some existing data in how similar kind of products or services have been delivered before, in what are the different steps that are needed to get to that desired value, to that outcome. And when we start mapping out these steps there, it's not just that we think about how to build that product, but we want to include everything. A full end-to-end there, but also have everything related to marketing, sales, design, delivery, support. It's not just about, okay, we need to build a product, but also everything else that goes around it, and that goes into that same value stream. And what we also do at this point, part of that mapping, is also start to identify what are all the different skills and competences that we need to actually deliver that particular product or service. So if we have a certain service, we need to have this skill and that skill and be able to do these different things in order to deliver that product. So that's what we start mapping out there. Now, the other kind of like half of these two tools, and value stream discovery and competency mapping kind of go hand in hand. They kind of like, both together make a bigger whole that gives you a better end result. Is that in the competency mapping, when we're in the value stream discovery, kind of figure out, okay, who are we doing this for and what do we need to do to get to there? This is now starting about looking inwards and looking at our organization. How can we start delivering on that value stream? Since in the value stream discovery, we've mapped out what are the different skills and competences that we kind of need to deliver on that value stream. What we now can do is seeing, okay, our people that we have, the people that are currently in our organization, what competences do these have? So let's start doing a self-assessment where we can ask each person to kind of like self-assess themselves versus these skills that we identified. And we do that typically on a 5 levels that we ask them to self-assess them. So I have no idea. I know what in theory this thing is about. I can do the work, but I need help for doing it. I can work independently on it, or I can mentor others. So it's kind of like the 5 different levels that we use in there. Out of that, we do then also a peer review. What we then typically do there is have 2 to 4 peers that are kind of like related to the same work that you are doing to also assess you. So it's kind of like a 360 degree in a sense where I'm self-assessing myself and my peers are assessing me on those same skills. And then we do a comparison between those 2 different assessments that we get. If you all agree, me and all my peers, 2 to 4 of my peers, all agree that my skill in topic X is like I can work independently, then probably that is the reality. But of course, if we have some differences, then that is something that we need to address, we need to talk about or see in there. Now, why do we do this? Is because we need to be able to deliver on that value. So we need to see that we have a good coverage in the organization for all the different skills that are needed to deliver on that value. So if you have a skill, for example, that we need to deliver value, but we have only people who have no idea and know the theory on that skill, then we are kind of having a problem there. So we need to acquire, we need to train someone, and make sure that we can deliver on that value. That's back to that statement I made earlier, that a successful organization needs to know on the one side what is value. So that is where the value stream discovery helps us. And then on the other hand, also be good at delivering value. That is where a tool like competency mapping can, for example, help us. Of course, I'm not saying these are the only tools you need. There's plenty of other things that also go into this to be able to deliver on things besides competency mapping. But these are the 2 different tools that I kind of wanted to point out here today to kind of like help a bit understand what that is that we're talking about when we talk about focusing on the value of things. Now, to wrap this up, what I wanted to do is another poll. And I know that this question is going to be tricky. So what I'd like you to think about is, should customer value be delivered effectively or efficiently? And I know probably a lot of you would like to answer both, but I'm on purpose not giving you that choice. What I want you to think about is, if you had to choose between these 2, which one would you pick? If you could kind of like optimize your organization for one, but not the other. So you kind of like you are either going to be very effective, you produce the desired result, or you're going to be very efficient. Which one would it be? This, by the way, is an interesting question to pose also to management in many organizations. Interesting. Currently, the majority seems to be on the effectiveness side. Share results. So 69% of you said effectively would be your choice, and 31% says efficiently. Yeah, my answer would be depends. That's my favorite answer on everything. The reason is that it also might depend on where are you actually on the market curve. If I go a couple of slides back, we are back on this one here. If you are, let's say, in the late majority, efficiency might be a very important thing for you to think about. While if you're more on the left side of the curve, effectiveness might be more interesting to think about. So this is also a question that will change depending on where you are on that market curve. So it's not a static thing that it's like always one right answer on it. So consider that it will change different times and so on. But it's good to understand in an organization which one are you actually preferring, because you need to optimize for one of them, and then the other one will follow from the other one. Trying to be both effective and efficient at the same time is not always going to be possible. Trying to make them both as high or as good as possible. And it's often easier to just choose one of them and let the other one kind of like follow from that. Being effective, focusing on the outcome often leads to inefficiencies, and being very efficient might actually often lead to being less effective because you're efficiently building the wrong thing up by accident, like that. So that's kind of like an often dilemma in there. And that's also kind of like related to the customer value and makes customer value challenging and different thing. If you want to go more deep in there, things, we do have our organic agility upcoming trainings. Fia, you wanted to say something about those?
Yeah, sure. I just posted also in the chat the link, which is similar to the one that Lasse has here. So if you want to know more about organic agility or learn more about what Lasse has been speaking about today, take a little bit of a deeper dive in all of the principles as well at once, we strongly recommend you to join our training. And it's also valid then for the Certified Agile Leadership certifications from Scrum Alliance. So the next upcoming training is in February, if you want to join already then. And then there's also one coming up in April, and these are remote. So anyone, anywhere can join these trainings. And we look forward to maybe have some of you from today also joining there. But don't worry, this will also be then in the email for you guys.
So let's move on to some questions. I see there's one question in the Q&A set.
Yeah, we can probably start with that one. And now is also, guys, a good time to pop any question you have to Lasse in the Q&A. The first question is kind of nice. There's a participant who says that he likes organic agility a lot, the concept, and the tree metaphor is a good one. But he would like to know how he can maybe share the organic agility out there in the real world and let people know about organic agility and how it can help others.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same problem with a lot of great ideas, is how to get others also to see that this is a great idea. So what I would suggest is not starting with the answer, but starting with the problem. Like, what is the challenge that the other peoples are facing? First, have them see, okay, there is this particular problem, and then organic agility is the potential answer to that problem, and not the other way around, that you say, oh, here's this nice set of principles and so on, and these would really help, but focus on that problem. That's, for example, what we also do in our training. We start with kind of like the market view and what the problems they are, and then work our way upwards towards kind of like organic agility, and to kind of like make people get this aha moment that, okay, yeah, actually there are these challenges and these problems in the world, and okay, this could be a potential solutions for that.
And I guess also, of course, our coaches would be available to help and sponsor a person who would like to let somebody else know about organic agility, right?
Do we have other questions?
Then there is one question. How does the value stream discovery relate to a portfolio?
Yeah, so you can create a portfolio out of it. I mean, if you have multiple value streams that you discovered and put them up, and also part of when we do the value stream discovery is when we do the activity mapping, you kind of get the big stages or steps that something is in your value stream, and out of that you can get a portfolio level board to kind of see, okay, these are the 5 different value streams our organization have, and we're currently working on this particular thing in this particular value stream, and so on. So you can create a portfolio board out of that. So it gives you a portfolio as well in the end.
Okay. When can MVP be a good tool, if at all, in the value creation steps that you talked about?
Yeah, so MVP is a good tool in there as well. So when you have discovered kind of what then the needs and problems of your users, personas are, I mean, when you start delivering it, you want to deliver the minimum kind of set of functionality to satisfy those needs. Because the less you deliver, or the more minimum your minimum viable product is, the more quicker with less money and investment you get that product delivered to those customers. So the easier and quicker you also can validate that that's actually what you identified is actually real, and you don't end up accidentally building a product for a need that doesn't actually exist. So I believe MVP is a very good approach to have in there, and without that, makes sense.
Okie
So
doke.
there's a lot of tools that I didn't mention.
Can you briefly just also describe what the difference to value stream mapping is?
Okay, described that already once, I think, but yeah. So value stream mapping is more about mapping out an existing value stream. You usually take the kind of like process and kind of like say these are the steps and so on. So it's kind of like starts with the process. While on the discovery, we actually start with the end point. We start with the customer and the need and the problem, and then you map the value stream backwards. While in the value stream mapping, you kind of like go forwards in the value stream. That kind of makes sense. Start at the end and then move our way forward. While in value stream mapping, you start at the beginning and move yourself towards the end.
Thank you. Here's also an interesting question now from the audience. Do you use either of those tools in your own organization, so in Agile 42?
Yes, we do. So we have used both of these tools. Actually, the last time we did a bigger value stream discovery was around when this whole COVID situation hit us. We had to pivot our business a little bit. So we actually ran through that whole thing there, for example. That's one of the bigger ones that I remember from the last year that we did. We also use the competence mapping actually to just do competence development in our organization. So we use that also for that, independent of the value streams itself, to just see like, okay, how am I doing as a coach or trainer? What are the competences that I should develop, and what do I have, and so on. And it's also, tied to your personal development in a sense. Do use both of these.
Thank you. Can you also say why value is not the first principle of the principles?
Yeah, so kind of like value in a sense isn't that the most important thing to actually have if you have principles. So it's not the first one because we need to build on the other two previously. So the first one is kind of like the cultural understanding and coherence that you have. Talking about value does not necessarily in an organization really make sense unless you understand what your organization culture is, how you're thinking, and how you make decisions. So you need kind of like the principle 1 and 2. At least if you start on the solution side of building the company or changing the company, you would first want to address principles 1 and 2 before you move on to principle 3. Because if you don't even know what your culture is, and then you start kind of like organizing your organization around a value stream, that's going to be difficult without knowing how your culture is and setting up culture and things like that. So that's why it's kind of like in that particular order. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is kind of like also a sequence in which we kind of go through these different principles.
Thanks. Then there's also another question. Do you see resistance in applying organic agility with your customers, and what are the what is the resistance in that case?
Okay. Yeah, so it's the same resistance as any change always resists. I think I once read that, was it 15% of people always resist any change? So no matter what you do, there will be 15% saying, okay, this is not good. So that kind of resistance, of course, always exists. But yeah, not all believe that this is the right way. I mean, there are plenty of, well, they're not so much of our customers, but let's say if you go into companies that I know, at least here in Finland, that have chosen different ways of how to approach changing the organization, different ways to do it. There's always some resistance.
That was, for now, the questions that we have in the Q&A. Might be that somebody still wants to ask you something. But while we're waiting for maybe a potential other question, I just, Lasse, want to thank you for the webinar today. It was very informative. I shared a lot of links in the chat with you guys today about connecting with me and Lasse on LinkedIn, or joining the community that we have also, where you can get newsletters and news from Agile 42 from time to time. So I really hope also some of you subscribe to that. Organic Agility website was also linked there. These links will be also in an email for you guys, but we are very happy if you have any kind of questions or something that you think about also after the webinar, that you just reach out to us, and we can take a discussion, book a meeting with you or something, and let you in on more details. Also, the training was already mentioned there, so please also join this. Virtually anything can be done kind of today, so however you want to sync and contact with us would be good. I don't see any more questions, so we can also kind of end the webinar a little bit shorter today, if you don't have anything to add, Lasse, from your side.
No, unless there's more questions.
Not at the moment. We hope to see also all of you now from today's webinar, of course, in the upcoming webinar in February. It's going to be in mid-February. The date and time is a little bit unclear still, but we are working on it. So stay tuned also from the webinar links and social media and so on. You can go and follow us, and we will for sure be posting about that. I see a lot of thank yous already coming in the chat. Also, thank you to you guys for being active today, listening and participating. It was really nice to see some new faces and also people we already know somehow. So thanks to all of you, and see you next time. Stay healthy and stay safe.
Yep, stay healthy, stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.